Okay, you want to speak first? Okay, good, good, good. Come, I thought we see the pictures and then you speak, as you like it.
I'm just going to talk to them.
Okay, good. So, yeah, please talk to them.
Yeah, I think it's not a slideshow. It's just sorry. Yeah. So Steffi asked me just to show a few pictures. I had understood that you meant me to talk to them. Just very, very briefly, we're talking about satellite imagery and what does it mean for global transparency and accountability, especially in the Ukraine situation and geopolitics more broadly. Just very, very briefly, at Planet, we have 200 satellites doing Earth imaging. We image the entire Earth landmass once per day with a line scanner, essentially. 200 satellites, and then another 20 or so that can zoom in at 50-centimeter resolution at any particular location up to 10 times per day. This topic of Ukraine, we're trying to help get the data into appropriate people's hands to best help give situation awareness to the Ukrainian government and other governments, NATO governments that are helping to defend Ukrainian sovereignty, helping NGOs do and help bring medical and relief to refugees and so on. And finally, providing the data where appropriate to news media who investigate various things and bring transparency to everyone about what's going on. I just give a few examples of that. This is the buildup of the Russian forces in the outskirts of Ukraine. It was reported on by The Economist. The day that President Putin said that they were withdrawing before the attack, we actually managed to spot them building a bridge, a platoon bridge, which was exactly in flat contradiction to what they were saying, so it was helping to bring accountability there. The New York Times did this great investigation piece on attacks on civilian infrastructure, in this case in Mariupol, and sadly counting mass graves now and tracking in preparation for human rights violations, war criminal cases. And just last week, we caught this factory, this grain facility being attacked by the Russians, and then they stole grain and took it outside of Ukraine to Russia against the Geneva Conventions because food is sort of sacrosanct. Not just Ukraine, of course, more globally. There's a few pictures of some of the work the BuzzFeed did using our data and satellite data in general to find and expose 300 Uyghur detention camps. And it's not just in the field of security. In fact, our bread and butter is all about sustainability and transparency. But for here today, we're mainly focused on security and the effects on geopolitics. So
Will Marshall is the co-founder and the CEO of Planet Labs, which has the mission, as I said, to accelerate humanity toward a sustainable and secure world. Will is joined by Kara Swisher, the only and the one Kara Swisher. Who of you have heard about Kara Swisher so far? Actually, she needs no introduction, but she's a journalist and entrepreneur who doesn't actually need an introduction. Yeah. Kara has hosted hundreds of news-making interviews with prominent figures of the tech industry. And I'm so glad, Will, that she is the one who will interview you. This honors you amazingly, but your work needs honor. It needs honor because it's so important to our society. Come on stage.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so proud that you done. I don't let you go.
Okay, let me go. Hi, Will. I'm going to take off my glasses. Sorry, I forgot my other glasses. Anyway, I'm thrilled to talk to you, and let's please make this a fucking Elon-free moment. That would be great.
I'm fine with
talking about
that.
space.
Yeah.
Would be great, because I think these are very serious issues, and I'm getting a little tired of penis jokes on Twitter. So let's talk about what it means. Let's start with the technology of what's happening. There are lots and lots of satellite companies up there of all kinds, of lots of people, a lot of entrepreneurs governments. I did an interview with the head of Space Force recently. He was talking about maintaining satellites. Talk a little bit about what's going on there right now from a technological perspective.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, you know, what you hear and see in the press is mainly around the rockets and the billionaires and the space tourism and Mars missions and stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to hear about any of that.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think the unwritten story is what's happening behind the scenes, if you like, is two things. The technological trends are lower cost rockets, that is true. The rockets have decreased in cost about 5x over the last 5 to 10 years, which is mainly because of the reusable rockets that Elon and SpaceX have done. The second thing is that satellites have increased in cost performance by about 1,000-fold. It's a bit like the mainframe computer to desktop computer revolution for satellites, and it's having an equivalent sort of spurring of the sector. And the main upshot of both of those things, and especially the satellite piece, is vastly more data.
Right.
We are collecting 10 times more imagery of the Earth than we did just 5 years ago, and we are transmitting around the Earth 10 times more data via communication satellites like Starlink and OneWeb. And so it's really a data revolution, and it's less about the moon and Mars and big rockets and space tourists, and more about the Earth economy and how we switch to a sustainable economy. And it's more about teleeducation and telemedicine and how we're helping with security
Which was the thought of doing these. Now, how many of them are up there? The head of Space Force said it's a real, you know, space garbage is a problem and everything else. So talk about the numbers that are up there.
Well, there's about 4,000 satellites, and there's about 100 million estimated pieces of space debris orbiting the Earth. So less than 1% of the objects are satellites. Actually, the dominant problem for an environment, space environment, I'm talking about perspective, is the debris. And that's primarily caused by anti-satellite weapons, when satellite countries deliberately blow up satellites, but also just the history of space age, which just didn't think too much about this. Now we've got that much more under control, but we do need to ban ASATs.
And there's commercial ones that are doing a wide variety of things. Besides you, give me an idea of the biggest ones up there.
Well, I think
there's communications.
There's communication satellites, Starlink. That's Starlink is the largest communications. We're the largest Earth imaging satellite fleet. I think between us and SpaceX, we might have about half the satellites. So just for a sense of scale, traditionally it's been mainly government satellites. So there's still a lot of those up there, right? Doing Earth observation, GPS.
Except whatever, something else.
Some other things that well, the irony is they pretend some of those satellites don't exist, and there's all these amateurs that go around with binoculars and take pictures of them and say, well, here it is. Yeah. And the US government says, no, what are you talking about?
Right, right. So I wanted to get a sense of that so people can understand how much they're ringing. And then there's low satellites. There's lower level satellites around.
Which ours are in the category of.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about what the point of yours is versus something. The others are supposed to bring communications, some are commercial uses, and various things. You're doing them. You're one of your biggest investors is Google, correct?
That's true.
And years ago when they started doing this, I remember I was there when they started. This was a long time ago when they were thinking about this, and they were thinking about it for, at that time, information gathering, and at the time they were obsessed with elephants. About watching poaching, exactly. And they were getting pictures of where they were actually being posed and where elephant trails were and things like that. What is the main focus right now for you all, now that Google has put their biggest investment in you? And obviously this is a company that loves to suck up all the information possible.
Yeah, they do like that. Yeah, so we are basically focused on getting more rapid information about our planet so that we can take care of it. In engineering, there's a principle that you can't fix something if you're not measuring it faster than the time scale that it's happening, right? So it stands to reason. And so humanity was observing the whole Earth maybe every month or every year, but we're having activities on it, whether that's logging or agriculture activities or building new stuff or war, that happens on days or sometimes hours, days, weeks. And so you can't help take care of the Earth and all of its natural resources if you don't have regular imagery of it. If you don't have irregular information, you can't manage what you can't measure, right, as the saying goes. So that theory of change applies to sustainability, like deforestation is an example where our imagery is used to stop illegal deforestation in the act. In fact, we can stop deforestation before a single tree goes down. We can count all the trees, but we see the logging road go in before they even knock down a tree, and then the police can go out. And we work with 64 countries' forestry ministries to try and prevent deforestation. And in security, again, it's a similar thing. You get inside the OODA loop to help shed that information, and doing that in a democratized way so that everyone can see is, we think, good for security.
Right, so talk about the democratized way, because there's one thing we talked about before this is just because we can see it doesn't mean they do anything about it. I'm thinking of the videos of police beatings in the United States. Everyone saw them, doesn't matter. Getting the information doesn't matter. In the case of let's start with deforestation. Why does that actually matter if there's going to be no action necessarily based on the imagery?
Well, I mean,
and then there's fake imagery.
Yeah, I mean, action is being taken. So, I mean, to use that forest example, once again, I was speaking to an environment minister in Glasgow, and they said that between last year and this year, when they started using our data, the number of actions, which is when they go send the police out to stop illegal deforestation or something like that, went up tenfold from 800 the previous year to 8,000 the year they started using Planet data. That's real effect. And by the way, they blow up the machinery afterwards with dynamite. It's amazing. They fly in and do that. No, and we last year published the first map of all the world's coral reefs in a project that was funded by Paul Allen, and a bunch of university researchers used our data to do this map. Never been done before. I was surprised. And already 6 countries have started establishing marine protected areas around those coral reefs, and there's another 30 such efforts underway to build those things. And you think, well, why are they doing that? They knew that they had that coral reef system. Well, it's sort of a carrot and a stick. The carrot is they now know exactly where it is. They know if there's an ocean bleaching event. They know if there's an illegal shipping activity. So they've got actionable information. And the stick is that everyone's now watching, because this data is all online on allencoralatlas.org, I think is the website. And so everyone else is watching. So if Sri Lanka doesn't care for its coral reefs, other people might point it out, right? And so I think, no, but not always, right? I mean, is this changing? I mean, I think the interesting question here is how this changes geopolitics. Does it change the calculus of leaders when they know they can't get away with things? Like if President Xi Jinping knows that we're going to expose all those Uyghur detention camps, so there was no point trying to hide them, or if Putin was going to pretend he wasn't going to invade, and everyone was going to know anyway. So, it's not clear how it's changing Putin's calculus now, but there isn't a question of whether or not it changes President Xi's thinking about the next thing, right? And certainly, government leaders are going to have to go, well, everyone's going to know about stuff. I can't just get away with macroscopic changes without everyone knowing. And so I think that brings accountability, and it also increases peace and security. In the Cold War, dominant situations where things almost went hot were when there was misinformation, or a lack of information. So it was when the US put missiles in Turkey and the Russians didn't know about it, or when the Russians put missiles in Cuba and the US didn't know about it. That's when things almost got hot. So by shedding information about all these things, it reduces miscalculation, reduces escalation. So I think as long as we take the principle, which we do, of not providing imagery to one player and not providing it to others, we are in non-exclusivity, basically. We're building towards peace and security. And then the final thing is that I think a general effect that this is having is that it's a little bit a counterforce to misinformation. You know, democracy is fragile. And we're seeing a lot of misinformation spread faster than factual information. But satellite data just speaks for itself,
well,
you know?
It could.
Well, it does. I mean, if a picture is what it is, and people, you know, it's authentic, it's independent, and people see things in it.
People perceive it that way, because
yeah,
it's certainly
and people, but there's 2 things. There's the independence of it and the actual chain of custody and making sure that it's not affected, and we can do good things about that. But there's also the perception, and there's the perception right now that satellite data is independent, and I think that's good, and we're leveraging that.
What is the danger? I want to get to Ukraine, especially because that's where you're seeing a lot of information being put up there. But the idea of things not being faked, no one thought facts could be faked, correct? I mean, what is the worry you have?
Well, I think, obviously, I do worry about that. I mean, we're doing some things that make sure that if we see an image online that we supposedly produced, that we can check that that is or isn't the one. We have the broader, so we can do that, but we have the broader challenge of whether people believe it even if we said
exactly.
no.
That's one.
Right?
One, they don't believe it, and two, people could manipulate those
Right.
images.
Well, I'm saying, so if they manipulate it, we'll be able to say that's manipulated. Because we have checks on our satellite all the way through, which we write into the image to make sure that no one can manipulate it without us knowing. But whether or not people believe that we say, oh, that's fake, that's another question, right? That's a perceptions issue. And I do worry about that. But I also think that one of the beauties of this is that in general, it's hard to do that because there'll be more providers of such information and it'll be harder to fake that out. And also it just, I think an interesting thing here is that it's bringing people closer to the event. Ukraine is a very distant thing for a lot of people in the world. The environment and challenge in the Amazon or the Congo Basin is a very distant thing. But imagery just brings people closer, less levels of abstraction away. So as long as we can avoid the deep fake issue on the imagery, we can go a long way to how.
So talk about Ukraine in terms of what you were showing, troop buildups, mass graves. Again, talk about where this has gone and what it's been used for, and then what does it do? Like, people see it. People have become numb to a lot of images, it seems.
Well, there's multiple, target audiences for this, if you like. I mean, so the governments themselves are using that information for smarter action, right, on the ground. The NGOs are using it in their crisis response units to better deliver medicines, know which borders open, and so on. And you're right, in the media, which is shedding light in general on the situation and bringing transparency to it, in time, people get bored of it. That's a human psychology issue. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how to answer that question. But I hope that this imagery actually keeps them more interested for longer in important events because they get closer to the issue.
We'll talk about what imagery has been most effective in Ukraine. Now, what are you aiming for now? What are you trying to show?
Well, I think
we've seen Russian troop movements, mass graves, obviously, where they lie about it. Nonetheless, they continue to lie.
Yeah, they do.
What else could happen? In the case of Russia, they don't care.
Yeah.
He's shameless, and so therefore, no photos are going to shame him. No satellite photos, no videos, no testimony.
Yeah.
What do you think has to happen in terms of what you're doing that becomes more? You can't look away from it, I guess, is the way I would put it.
I don't know. I mean, we're trying to ensure that all the actors can get value out of it do, and they are, we see, taking action, leveraging it. I mean, I think the most canonical example of that in the news media was this example of that bridge that I shared, where Putin said, "I'm withdrawing," and this said exactly the opposite the very same day.
Right.
So just called his bluff, right? That may not have got through to the Russian people because there's the propaganda sort of bubble, but on the other hand, it cohered the West, because everyone can see, citizens and politicians alike, that Putin's not doing what he said. What's coming out now and what's starting to happen is that we're preemptively helping organizations are preemptively starting to build up cases for war crimes, whether that's the sort of stealing grain, which is illegal, or targeting civilian infrastructure, which is illegal. So that's going to happen way faster in this case than ever before. The cases are going to be built during the war, not like 10 years afterwards, like happened in Serbia, Kosovo, or something.
Yeah.
And then we're also seeing how people are using the information to preempt what's going on in the food security issue. I mean, in the Security Council 2 days ago, they were talking about the food security issue. Lebanon has 80% dependency on supply of wheat from Ukraine.
And there's only 10 weeks of wheat left.
Right, and so we've only got a short window to do something about this. What our data can help do with certain organizations is help them improve the crop yield where they are, find other suppliers, improve the crop yield in those places, because we can actually tell crop type and crop yield for every 3-meter box. And so help supply chain issues and blockades. Oh, this port is open if this port is not, as best we can for those organizations to do that.
All right, last question. What's the technology that's coming next in this area from more detail? Or,
I think
because people are worried, obviously, about surveillance too.
Yeah.
I mean, we assume they can see everything now. I do, at least.
Well, remember that satellites are 500 kilometers away. That's like taking a picture from Munich to Berlin and trying to see data. I mean, it doesn't really touch the sort of things that you might think it does,
Sure.
personal privacy, things like that. But I think where we're going to see is more satellites doing better and better data, more resolution, more temporal frequency, more spectral bands. We're launching a fleet of hyperspectral satellites that will be able to detect methane and CO2 point source emissions and things like that. But I think the more interesting areas where AI and machine learning is coming at this sector like it's coming at, I mean, I said it's a data revolution. Well, data doesn't, AI doesn't go anywhere without the data. It's zero value. But it's a field day for machine learning, right? Computer vision. So I think that has made a lot of advances in the last few years. I mean, I can imagine us less and less looking at all the imagery and more querying what's on there, right? Just tell me how many trees there are, tell me the latitude and longitude of the illegal logging in this country, or tell me where there's new roads or new bridges or bombed out hospitals. And you should just be able to get those answers, right? So I think that's going to be a game changer for the democratization of all of this information, which, right now it's a Google or a US government or a big ag company that's getting leverage out of this data, but the smaller organizations less so, but I think this is going to democratize it.
And why aren't governments doing this more? Do you imagine it's going to be all commercial?
Well, the governments do their own thing. I mean, like NASA and ESA, for European Space Agency, for example, have their own missions, which are very carefully radiometrically calibrated, doing great science and things like this. What we're doing is much more frequent, lower-cost imagery, which is more to do with applications, humanitarian and commercial.
Okay, great. Well, from Planet, thank you.
Thanks, Kara. Lisa?